we're seeing fewer middle-class voters because nobody can even define what middle class really means. I mean, can you put a number? Tell me what you have to earn to be middle class. What we're seeing here in the United States as the gap between the wealthy and the poor just grows wider and wider. What we're seeing more and more is no middle class, incredibly rich people, and the working poor. We're beginning to see some Americans self-identify as working poor. It's tough to admit you're part of the working poor. Now, people tend to lie to themselves and they'll say, I'm middle class. So I'm going to talk to Democrats, Democratic politicians right now, and voters. And this is some tough medicine to swallow, but it's time somebody spoke the truth to you. So here are the facts, and you're not going to like this. A lot of people are going to be angry at me for saying this, but people need to swallow some bitter truths here. So here we go. If you owe more on your credit cards than you have in your savings account, if you owe more on your credit, if the balance on your credit card is more than what you have in your savings account, you are the working poor. Now, I know that hurts for some. You've been taught to frame it differently. It's just credit card debt. It's just student loan debt. It's just an auto loan debt. Americans have been trained to separate the two, like they're a mortgage, but they're not mortgages. Auto loan, student loan, credit card debt are not a mortgage. Mortgage is different. A mortgage is borrowing money for a lifetime investment, hopefully, that over time will hopefully be worth more than what you borrowed. Credit card debt, student loan debt, auto loan debt, that is what is owed with pretty much no upside. So we need politicians to start saying to Americans, if you rent, if you don't own a home, and you owe more money than you have in your savings account, you are not middle class. You're either poor or you're the working poor. Say it with me, because the easier it becomes for Americans to say this, the easier it's going to be to start electing Democratic politicians who will address this truth. So say it with me. If you rent and you owe more on your credit cards or your auto loan or your student loans than you have in your savings account, you're poor. You're poor. Now, that's a fact. Do the math. If you're a renter and you owe more on your credit card and your student loans and your auto loans than you have in your checking or savings account, you're poor. Even if you're working, you're poor. You're not middle class, you're poor. I want you to think now about the two. It would be nice if Democratic politicians talk this way and stop worrying about the stigma of calling voters, people don't like the stigma of being poor. You're not poor, you were robbed. Since Ronald Reagan became president, there's been the largest theft of national wealth flowing upward in world history. So I want you to think about the $200 billion Iran war supplemental that Trump just asked Congress to pass. Think about the minimum wage, our minimum wage that has been sitting at $7.25 an hour since 2009. Get out your calculator. And what is $7.25 times 40? That's below the poverty line. If you work 40 hours a week at $7.25 an hour, you're living in poverty. Haven't raised it since 2009. They've effectively eliminated the minimum wage. Think about the Biden-era Obamacare subsidies expiring on December 31st, 2025, and now 10% of Americans, according to the Wall Street Journal, since January 1st, little under 3 months, 10% of Americans quit Obamacare because they can no longer afford it, because the Biden-era Obamacare subsidies expired. According to the Wall Street Journal, another 17% of Americans currently on Obamacare now saying they don't expect to have health insurance by the end of the year. And now I want you to take a deep breath and swallow reality. If you rent, if you owe more on your credit cards, your student and auto loans than you have in your savings account, you're working poor or you're poor. If you rent, owe more than you have in the bank, if you owe more than you have in the bank and you're putting money on your credit card to pay your bills, you're poor. Now, the trick the rich play on Americans is they make Americans feel stigmatized, ashamed to admit it to themselves and others that they are, in fact, poor. I believe the Democrat who runs for office and speaks financial truths the way Republicans pretend to about government debt, if Democrats spoke financial truths about personal debt, the way Republicans lie about government debt, I believe that Democratic Party will usher in an era of permanent majorities for the Democratic Party. It's not going to happen until we rid the Democratic Party of millionaires. More Cory Bush and less Ro Khanna. I know everybody loves Ro Khanna. He's worth a couple $100 million. I want to vote for Democrats who have skin in the game. So it's not going to happen. We're not going to get that Democratic Party until voters say, God damn it, I'm poor. State your truth. What is your truth? Don't allow plutocrats to hijack religion, the American dream, and personal responsibility. Don't let them twist it all up so it's a poor person's fault that they're poor. No, poor people are poor because the rich have been stealing from us since 1981. And we allow them to keep stealing from us because too many Americans are too ashamed to say, I'm poor. I'm poor. Now, my parents, currently rotting in hell, my parents came from the greatest generation. So why was Franklin Delano Roosevelt able to usher in an era of government where we took care of each other? How did we end up with this vast and powerful social safety net that Trump and the Republicans pretty much stripping bare? Why did that happen? Because my parents' generation, they weren't ashamed to say, I'm poor. In fact, my parents' generation wore poverty as a badge of honor. Because everyone was poor back then. And if they weren't poor, they acted like they were. And if they weren't poor, they thought they were poor. You know, during Jimmy Carter's funeral services, which people should watch, his grandson, very touching eulogy, he described Jimmy Carter and his wife, Rosalind, in the kitchen, washing plastic baggies and hanging them out to dry, and everybody laughed. Oh, that generation washing out their baggies. They were laughing kind of like, oh, how we put up with that generation and their values. How ridiculous it looked that an ex-president of the United States and his first lady are still so frugal, they wash out their plastic baggies. And while everyone was laughing, I thought, what's so funny? That's a great idea. Wash out your plastic bag. Well, don't have baggies in the first place, but if you have plastic baggies, reuse them. Wash them out. Why waste money in plastic, especially now, given what is going on in the Persian Gulf? Look at what we have to jump through and die for in order to get plastic. So I made the mistake of telling a close friend, you know, I'm going to start washing my baggies. I'm going to honor President Carter and Rosalind, and I'm going to wash my baggies. And my friend said, you're sick. And I'm ashamed to say I'm not washing my baggies because I'm ashamed. I would be ashamed to wash my baggies. That's my generation. Wash your baggies. And your balls. Wash your bag. That's my message. Wash your baggies and your balls. Is anybody still here? Okay. So that's the greatest generation. They used to brag about how poor they were. And they weren't ashamed of poverty. If you rent and you owe more money on your credit cards, auto, and student loans than you have in your checking or savings account, you're the working poor. If you rent and owe more than you have in your checking and savings account, and in order to pay the bills, you still must use your credit card, that's poor. That's poor.